Now, what are the words that will...
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another Autoline After Hours. We got a great topic today. We're going to get into affordability of cars. Gary Vaslash, he's not here today. He's out on the media launch, I think, for the Lincoln Nautilus, but he'll be back next week. But I got three great panelists here. They all have something in common. They've all worked in the automotive industry. Chris Thomas has worked for BorgWarner as the Chief Technology Officer. You did some work with NIO as well, right?
Right.
And now what, you're just consulting with...
So I've been consulting for the last 6 years with a variety of customers, including NIO.
So, good. That's why I wanted you here. Jack Keebler, too, also here.
Thanks, John.
Worked at General Motors.
Yep. Worked for the Enthusiast magazines and GM, and consulting now.
Yeah. And Jim Hall also worked at General Motors.
Three separate times.
Three separate times. One of them was liaison with Toyota, no?
Correct. And Isuzu, but that's sort of like liaison with your lapdog.
Right. So anyway, let's get into this whole thing of affordability. And Jack, I know that you were the one who even suggested that should be the topic of this show. And what's your take on it? Why did you think that was such a good topic for today's show?
Well, I mean, I know that some recent surveys have been done with customers that are interested in EVs, and affordability was number one with them. The charging infrastructure is also another concern of theirs, but yeah, affordability. And I mean, if you look at a lot of the new EVs that are out there, I guess the average price is something like $53,000. That's about, $1,100 a month. That's a lot of money. And, during the pandemic, prices rose, inventory shrank, of course, and, dealers push prices up, which is reasonable. They're business people.
I disagree totally. I don't think it was reasonable. Okay. I think they contributed heavily to the big spike of inflation that drove up interest rates that they're now complaining those interest rates are hurting car sales. I think they're part of the cycle.
Okay. But anyway...
Sorry, let me get off my soapbox here a second.
It's just, people were used to prices, somewhere closer to, say, $35,000 or $40,000.
Right.
And 53 is quite a climb.
Even ICE, the average ICE car is about 47,000 right now.
Good point. In fact, I guess, all the prices are settling back down again.
A little bit.
The delta between electrics and EVs has actually closed slightly.
Right.
Yes.
That's right.
So
it's like 4,500 or something like that, or 5,300, something like that.
Depends on which you're comparing. I mean, that's the problem.
Right.
I
think McKinsey did a really great study where they looked at the average price to build a vehicle. And they said the ICE vehicle is about 23 grand in parts to build it. And the average EV was around 32 grand. And they said that, over the next 5 or 7 years, I think they estimated another $2,500 will come out of the EVs.
Was that through battery, Chris, or was that through all this other gigacasting and other stuff?
But I mean,
gigacasting is not unique to
right,
EVs.
You can do that in any vehicle, right?
True, that's right.
Yeah, but it's the great hope, isn't it? I mean, that's what everybody's talking about. In fact, they're talking about
until you get hit in the right rear quarter.
Well, right. Repairability is a big deal.
Serviceability is a giant issue in gigacastings.
Right. And which is
castings and nodes in general, they're issues.
Which is
with the battery pack in an EV, as soon as you crumple the battery pack, you've
totally
total just
yeah.
Anyway.
So I think the gigacasting may not be the big
I mean,
issue.
the batteries represents about 40% of the total value in the vehicle, or at least 40%.
So if you use that $32,000 average price to build a vehicle, and you start saying that the average, even at $100 a kilowatt hour,
right,
for a pack, and you're talking about $7,000. So it's 25, 20, 30%.
Everybody keeps pointing that out, but what is I think it depends what you're comparing to powertrain, electric to ICE, right? Because a V8 twin turbo, intercooled, all the bells and whistles on it, that's a pretty expensive package. I don't know the price off the top of my head, but I bet it's around $7,000 to $8,000, especially when you put the transmission to it, or more. Or more, says the guy who worked inside.
Yeah.
No. It's,
yeah. And somebody else is nodding that yes.
Absolutely. I mean, a twin turbo V8 is, especially if it's a double overhead cam, you're really, it's going to be at least that.
Yeah. So I think that's a fair point to make, that, ICE versus BEV. Yes, BEV is more expensive, but compared to what? Now, if you're talking about a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine, with like a 6-speed manual or a 6-speed automatic, that's pretty cheap.
There's
Yeah,
not
I
a
don't
lot
think
of
there
those
are.
left,
There's
though,
none of
right?
those left. They're all downsized, boosted,
Exactly.
mild hybrids, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really becoming the
1.3
standard.
turbos.
Well,
and
that's
things
just
like
it. All the car companies are hoping for a crossover where the total cost for the powertrain of an EV is at comparable or actually less than an IC vehicle.
Right.
And they're all saying, and it's funny because you can see that happening. You can see a time where, because of regulatory issues on IC, you're adding so much cost to the engine, and there's so little here, and you're getting economies of scale that you get out of EVs you don't get at the same level from internal combustion powertrains.
Right, because you're chasing a power levels requirements and then also emission controls.
Mhm.
And so when you get done handling those two big new important areas, suddenly the battery cost, you're watching what's going on in the battery bill, and you're saying, hey, maybe with some new chemistries we can get to the right price.
But you have companies committing to electric specifically in hopes that they're going to find that crossover point quickly. The problem is, where that crossover hits, it isn't going to hit for every vehicle at the same time. It'll probably start with one very specific type of vehicle,
i.e. the V8 twin cam
or the
turbo.
other way around. That the cost of regulation to get a car clean means you've got to do a hybrid with a battery pack in it anyway in your IC car. And you're talking about a short range vehicle, like a small entry vehicle. But I'm just saying, it's going to happen at one type of car first at one company. And another company can find the crossover in an entirely different car. But the industry wants this to happen like that.
And it's not going to happen.
It will
like
not
that.
happen that way.
Chris, when do you think we'll see this crossover?
So I'm maybe a little bit more pessimistic. I think it's going to take a while, and you really have to.
Well, put a time frame on a while,
Well,
because here's why I'm asking. A lot of people in the industry are saying 2027 is the crossover point.
So you got to look at the
unpredictable number.
But you got to look at these studies and really get into the details. And most of them look at the full life of the vehicle, including fuel. And they usually start out comparing a diesel vehicle in Europe, where it's heavily taxed, and there's this really expensive after treatment. But those really expensive after treatments, the price is actually dropping because of the drop in internal combustion engines. Platinum, palladium, and rhodium prices are dropping.
They're crashing.
They're crashing, right? So the cost of the after treatment is actually not what it used to be, right? So therefore, your crossover point gets pushed out further.
Interesting,
right?
Interesting.
I think there's a whole bunch of other and the commodities on the battery side.
Just the opposite is happening.
Well, but lithium's been a roller coaster more than the spikes, right? I mean, it's been up and down.
But there are also
but the trend line is going up. That's
there are
my
also
point.
there are also new chemistries which look like there might be some price reductions there. The iron phosphate batteries.
Jack, there are three kinds of liars in the world. There are liars, damned liars, and battery engineers. Yeah,
I've heard that joke.
But it's true. I mean, I was on an EV program at General Motors that just happened to have the name EV in it, the production version. We were before the production version. And I remember having the battery engineers come and talk to us. And some of them were from Hughes, when it was a division of General Motors, and they were doing stuff for the Bright Pebble satellite. So they're showing us this battery, and they're telling us the energy density, and they say, what is this? And he goes, well, it's sodium sulfur. I'm like, how do they react unless they're really hot? He goes, oh, they are. And then it's like, well, what kind of money are we talking about? He says, well, these are prototype batteries. We don't know. But these, if you were to build now, are probably $100,000. And he's talking about these little things. And I said, you know how many we'd need for a car? And they knew exactly, because it was replacing the lead acid batteries and the impact is what they were doing. And he goes, I'm confident the price would come down.
Right.
I'm sorry, you need more than that to make a commitment to a technology. And that's why I say the crossover may be there. But as you say, on some cases, it's going to get pushed out farther. On others, it may never happen on some cars, but there will be cars. It will happen probably before I die, but I wouldn't even take a bet on that.
The issue is not the technology, it's the timeline. I mean, that's the thing that really needs to, be discussed, at high resolution.
Except the timeline's the result of the technology.
But I mean,
If you you can't mandate a timeline, Jack.
No, exactly my point. In other words, it ends up being stretched out over a long period of time. We usually get there. I mean, we think about how long it took us to take to the air in airplanes. I mean, there were all those people crashing and burning, and we finally, we get to a place where it takes off, and it goes.
But they still haven't perfected it, because they don't go up and stay up.
Right.
They don't.
Parachutes.
They always come down. I mean, so it's like.
But yeah, it takes time. It takes time, and you know what? People are not patient. I mean, when you look at things like electrification, or you look at things like autonomy, unfortunately, there were a lot of people out there that were promoting these technologies and saying, "Hey, they're going to show up a lot sooner than they are." And I mean, some of us saw some of those dates, like 2026, 2030, and you're like, you know what? It's out further on the horizon.
A former head of Ford said in 2019 they'd be selling their autonomous car.
Right. Wow. Yeah, but it was because
and then Argo went away.
Listen, it was the leaders in the field who were looking at the rate of improvement that were making those predictions. Yeah. It was the Chris Urmsons of the world and the Sebastian Thruns that were saying.
Except everybody knows that you get into maturation curves when you start doing new product, any new development. It tends to be very sharp. And as you get to the area where it's becoming mature, let's figure out what we're going to do. These things get really close to flat, and there's a point at which you pour cubic money in for 2.5%, if you're lucky at a point.
But I mean, with autonomy, I mean, even if you're 99.999%,
you're not good.
You're killing thousands of people,
right?
So it's got to be.
Right, I know,
but to get those really corner cases takes a long time. And
this is where I think the industry's got to come clean with the public and say, look, autonomous cars are never going to be perfect. They are going to get in accidents, and people are going to get killed in those accidents. But they're going to get in far fewer accidents. Right. And we could save 30,000 people a year just in the U.S. alone. We could prevent 2 million people from going to the hospital. So to me, waiting for perfection is a mistake.
There's a difference between perfection and something that, I mean, I'm sorry. They keep using aircraft as an example. It's a horrible example. Aircraft, when they're operating in a fully autonomous mode, are operating in a two-dimensional environment that has a control system that deliberately keeps them spaced apart. Now, if we're going to have autonomy, the thing that scared me the most of autonomy was the time in which it's the interregnum before the non-autonomous vehicles are gone.
Sure.
And it's when you have the mixed pool of vehicles.
It actually gets worse than that, though. When you have the vehicles that are partially autonomous, right? We have them today, the Super Cruise, the
Blue Cruise,
and
right?
ADAS.
But these vehicles are actually making the existing drivers worse because they're not having those hours and hours behind the wheel anymore, right?
They're losing skills.
They're losing skills. They're losing that instinct of driving.
Is it that, Chris, or everybody's looking at their phone?
I think
that's the real culprit here.
Why can't both things be true?
It is both. They're losing skills because they're using the phone and the car can drive them. Right. When it can't, every now and then they have an oh my God moment, where they drop the phone and go like, oh.
But the technology, I'll tell you, the technology is there today to solve that problem. My key fob, when I go to start, I reach in the car to start the car. If it's in my right pocket that is inside the door, it will start. If it's in the left pocket, the vehicle won't start because it's outside the car. We have the technology today to know where that key fob is within centimeters. We have the technology to know where the phones are. Mm-hmm. So I think some of the stuff that Steve Kiefer's been doing on distracted driving, there's lots of technology out there that we could be implementing today to solve that problem.
Well, look, you're in Michigan right now, and in many states across the country, you cannot have a phone in your hand. It has to be paired. But there's even a problem with paired phones when you're having a conversation. And the reason is, here's the difference between talking to somebody, even with a paired phone, versus them sitting next to you. If somebody cuts in front of you, if a dog runs into the street, if you're making a turn, the person sitting next to you shuts up. They let you do whatever you got to do.
They might even point it out.
They might even point it out. When you're on the phone, they're just blah, 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 blah. And somehow or other, we feel this compunction that we've got to stay, in conversation with all this craziness going on around the street with them. So what I think we need is, look, I'm not the first to say this. I learned about this decades ago from the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute. the car companies need to work with the phone companies so that
Yeah.
if you're decelerating, i.e. getting on the brakes, and you're decelerating at X Gs or point Gs, your phone cuts out or the person at the other end gets a signal. If you're turning the steering wheel at a given rate of, that's indicating an abrupt turn, boom, it cuts it. So there's got to be things that
Those
can
are
be
all
done.
great, but you know what? All of those fly in the face of one thing:
What?
Freedom?
affordability.
That's true.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
How so?
Because you need sensors and a network to manage that.
You're adding cost to the car.
Well,
it's not in there now. That's my point. The issue is affordability on
Oh,
cars today.
okay.
That's all I'm just saying.
Careful, John. You're adding dollars. Here.
I'm adding dollars, but I would argue I'm adding a few cents, really. And the payoff is huge in terms of safety.
But not to the car companies.
Well, look, they have a societal obligation, don't they?
That's not my point. My point is that when you start putting technology in cars, if you want to find affordable cars, go back and look at one of the affordable cars of 1969, the new Maverick,
Mm-hmm.
and look what's not in it.
Everything.
Basically, yeah.
Let's have a radio.
I
I don't
had
have
one.
a heater.
That was the first car I
You got a
bought.
Maverick?
I bought it used. It was a 3-on-the-tree inline 6. And it's not like I look back on that car fondly.
No.
I don't,
No.
but it was a set of wheels that I could afford at
Yeah.
the time.
Right.
And it didn't have anything on it.
No.
It-
I mean,
it
they
did-
even killed a lug nut from it.
I'm
That's what
not
I
even-
loved. They went to
I-
4
I'm-
lug nut wheels back on that car after introducing 5s on Falcons. They went, and it's like, why? Saves money. I'm like,
But Chris, would the public accept a stripped down car?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think they, if you look at especially I think younger buyers today, they want the big screens,
They
they
wanna
want
be
the
connected.
infotainment system, they
Yeah.
want the subwoofer, they want all of the bells and whistles, right? That's more important than what's under the hood.
So when we get to this affordability thing, that's my question. There's this big push right now. Oh, we have to have inexpensive, small electric cars. I'm not sure that's what Americans want, unless it's a really compelling small electric car. Really compelling. It's got to be the equivalent of what the Volkswagen Beetle was
agree.
in this country back in the
Yeah.
60s and 70s,
Remember-
mid-70s.
remember the least appropriately named car of the past 25 years in the
Tell
United
me.
States was the Smart. Okay, plain and simply, it was just the wrong name for that car, because here you had a car that made a very bold design statement, and especially in Europe when they came out, it was different, it was funky, there was something about it. It had something. The problem was, by the time it got to the States, here's this car that has all those aspects, none of which are important for the average American buyer. So here's the product, and the product is a 2-seater. It doesn't get especially good fuel economy. In fact, at the time, a Prius got better fuel economy, and guess what? It didn't cost that much more. So you get into this thing about, it's not just that it's affordable, it has to be appealingly affordable.
But even more, that car drove terribly.
Of course it did.
Terribly.
Of course it did.
And so when I talk about having a
But
compelling
the average,
car, it
the
didn't
average
need it.
buyer probably right now, the median buyer now, I suspect, doesn't care that a car, as by our metric, drives well. I would be surprised. They want it to be comfortable. They want it to be quiet so they conduct whatever they're doing in the
But I
car.
think they want it to be safe.
Yeah, right. But that's right
And-
now. But nobody's going to tell you they want a safe car because they're expecting it to be safe.
Well, sure, but I mean, I've seen the structure of a smart car and those
The
it's
Tritium and
huge box sections because the car's so small, it doesn't have crumple zones, right? They did a good job with engineering to make it safe. But boy, if you get hit by F-350, it's still it's
It
mass.
still is. But
momentum is mass times velocity. Still,
I agree.
but
I agree.
it was an engineer's car. It was a car that was created by engineers for a need they perceived.
Right, but the problem was it was not fun to drive. If it had been a fun to drive car, it would have done a whole lot better.
That's a dangerous one, because your definition of fun to drive, for some, they had a convertible version. Take the top off. For a lot of people, that's fun to drive. That's all they care about. That's it.
Did we chase people out of small cars, though? I mean, with so many of these big vehicles on the road, the big SUVs and the big pickups, I mean, you feel a bit of a threat.
The
when you're driving
chasing
something
started a
small.
long time before that.
But I think there's unintended consequences of cafe rules as part of it.
Right.
So it used to be we would make small cars like the Ford Escort, and Ford would sell them at almost cost, right?
Right.
So that they
Break
could sell,
even.
so that they could sell Lincoln Town cars or
And F-150s.
well, that's pass car versus truck, but yeah,
Yeah,
but they would make small pass cars so they could sell big pass cars, and the corporate average fuel economy would be at the standard. Once we went to the footprint rule, which basically says it's the track of the vehicle times the wheelbase, right? Now all of that changes, right? You don't have to make small cars. So why would you make small cars if you're not going to make money on it?
And nobody's making small cars.
Right, but
the other part of the other tail of that is you could take a vehicle like a Ford Escape. If it's a front wheel drive, it's classed as a passenger car. If it's an all wheel drive, it's classed as a truck. Now it's a really, I won't say lousy, but it's not a good passenger car for its footprint. So it
good
actually,
in what respect?
It versus the standard, for its footprint, it actually pulls their average down. If in the truck fleet, it actually pulls their average up. So that's why you see all-wheel drives being offered in Jeeps and Escapes and all
those
these
small
SUVs.
That I did not
And
know. That's fast. And you're saying that's all because of CAFE going to the footprint?
I think it's an unintended consequence of the footprint rules.
But John,
and having a separate pass car and truck fleet, right? So these things are combined. This is why I think this has contributed to the rise in SUVs and those. It's not just sure people like driving them. People like sitting up higher. They like the all-wheel drive utility.
Right.
no one buys a car for the regulatory reasons. They just don't.
But the OEMs have to put so much more money into a small passenger car.
But that's
to
what
make
CAFE
it
did in the start.
CAFE.
When they started CAFE, they had separate car and truck CAFE. If you went to the people that wrote the CAFE bill and said, because of this, in 2001, the U.S. vehicle market will be a majority of trucks. And they'd say, no, it isn't. That's not it. This is to get people to be more responsible. Regulations have a tendency to have consequences that are not expected. Half of those tend to be beneficial to the intent. The other half never are. And the thing is, it's literally not forecastable. Because when they did the regulation, originally splitting it, they didn't think about footprint.
Well, no, in 2012,
I know that. But my point is that the mechanism was already in play by then. SUVs, when you saw, remember, there was a while in the US when the biggest selling family vehicle was single brand vehicle.
Explorer?
No, before that, Chrysler minivan.
Minivan, yeah.
Okay. Then, in the course of 20 months, Jeep, well, they had one anyway, Ford, General Motors introduced four-door compact crossover or compact SUVs.
Right.
And it's like you threw a switch in the market, and you could see the migration from one to the other. You saw it, and that was long before footprint. That the direction was going that way. Footprint only made it confusing for the manufacturers, where they got into this split front drive or two-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. Other than that, to the customer, they're building the cars I like.
Yeah, but you couldn't really buy a V8 passenger car, right? There weren't that many of them. Whereas you could go buy a V8 Explorer, V8 Grand Cherokee.
But that's where the thing started. That's
right?
why in 2001 you had the crossover. And it's funny because if you looked psychographically, there was a program we worked on. It was to build the GMT 400 truck. So it was the previous generation truck.
Silverado.
It's Silverado. We went and talked to customers about it. And my favorite was when we're in Oklahoma, and it's an owner. He has this incredibly sharp, completely done up Chevy pickup, a CK1500 or C1500. And he's got this bed cover on it. And I say, what do you put in the bed? And he goes, nothing. He was a guy that bought Monte Carlos and things like Cutlass Supremes with V8s. This was his V8 he could buy.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what he bought. So that even took a customer with a different psychographic attitude and then put it into trucks. And then those trucks drove a huge part of the recreational, the non-working truck market for a long time. You wanted to sell to those buyers because they liked them and they kept them 3 years and got another one. Where the average truck buyer before that would hold the truck a little longer.
But don't you think we chased a lot of people out of the small cars too? Because
How so, Jack?
Well, because there's a threat. He's bigger than I am, and back to your physics, the bigger vehicle is going to win the fight.
That's always been there, though, hasn't it?
Well, it started even more.
But there's more of them now.
There's more
as a percentage of the fleet.
But if you go back half a century, there were big American sedans, and people didn't want to buy little cars.
And Pintos in Vegas.
Unless they were compelling. And the Volkswagen Beetle, they sold 500,000 a year just of that one model. And I don't know is that there's been any other recent small car as compelling as the Beetle was in its day.
Yeah, but getting back to accidents and FARS data and things like that. I mean, when you start looking at this, it's who is going to go out and buy a vehicle that's not going to make their family safe?
Nobody.
Right?
No.
So I mean, when you're trying to make a buying decision, that's got to be one of the factors you weigh literally when you're trying to make a decision about.
So in this whole discussion of affordability,
yeah,
small cars are not the answer, is what I'm getting from this conversation.
Here's the thing: you have to have a compelling reason that borders on an obsession for why you want to buy a car that's
small.
right now it's very small or very large. Whatever it is, for cars that are playing in these weird edges, there has to be an obsessive reason to buy it. The truth is, this served Mini for a while. It did. People just wanted a Mini, and
because it was a compelling car.
That was a fun to drive car. To John's point,
yeah.
right? It had like a go kart.
It did, and there are a lot of people that never knew that. They never knew it.
That's right. But they still enjoyed the car.
Of course.
Right. They may not have ever pushed it to its limits.
It's my contention.
But there was an esprit,
It's my contention that people that bought Smarts, that was the same for them.
Yeah, but
there weren't enough of them. That's the problem.
No, that's not even that. They had that manumatic transmission.
Yeah,
It drove
that was
abysmally bad. Abysmally
very
bad.
shocky shifts.
Oh, it was lousy. Had they done something different with the transmission, I think
clutch transmission would have solved it, right?
No.
Yes.
Ask all of the people that bought dual clutch Focuses.
But that was a dry clutch.
That was a dry clutch.
Yeah.
Okay, see, we're finding engineering solutions for bad mechanizations. That's my point.
But that was a cost. That was a cost-driven thing. Ford went on the cheap with that. They should have paid for a wet clutch, and then they wouldn't have all these warranty issues that they're running into.
Right. Yeah. So that the dry clutch, right? That they didn't have the issues in Europe because
expectations are different because they're not a bunch of automatic owners.
That's part of it. But also you're in an ecosystem where you're driving with other with manual transmission vehicles. And so when you're in stop and go traffic, people move,
they move differently.
20 feet and stop, 20 feet and stop, right? Because they're in a manual transmission.
Right.
You're in an automatic and everybody's creeping along. You're going to be creeping along with your dual clutch transmission. And that dry clutch is just going to be slipping and slipping and slipping. And it's going to overheat, and that's the issues, right? A wet clutch, you can get away with it,
right?
Yeah,
they generally handle higher torque too.
Yeah, see,
engineering solutions for environmental issues.
Oh no, I think that was probably a purchasing decision, not an engineering one.
Ouch.
Right. The fact is they could buy the thing. Somebody engineered a dry clutch and probably sold it as being just as good.
Yeah, well,
and if you
Chris's
sell it,
former company sold it to them.
No, we sold wet clutches.
They did wet clutch.
BorgWarner did only wet.
You didn't do the dry one.
They knew.
Okay.
They knew better.
Yeah.
They did. I mean, the truth is that the mechanization that was first in the DSGs was phenomenal. It really was. And you're right. Was it as smooth and as progressive as a regular automatic? No. In Europe,
depends on the calibration. You could make it.
You could make it that way. Yeah.
You could make it that way. People kind of liked a little bit stiffer shifts if they bought a dual clutch.
Felt sportier.
Felt sportier, but and you can do shifts in
they're fast,
fractions of a tenth of a second.
Is there
right?
also a durability
80
question
milliseconds
when you prolong the shift? Is there also a durability question for how long the transmission lasts?
No.
The fluid mitigates a lot of those issues.
No, but for fluid drive, right? But not for dry clutch.
Well,
is that maybe one of the reasons that was an issue? In other words, they were trying to do quick
I think
clutch engagement to not.
It's all creep and slow speed stuff, is my understanding.
Okay.
They also were in an interesting one where they did the first year there were 13 software revisions to it, and I'm hearing them trying to do software revisions to get it to shift better, so it's more like a DSG. And I said, this is like having a house and having software to add rooms. It doesn't work. Okay, there's a physical issue here,
right?
And they never did really address it.
Hey, look, we got to take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back and talk more about affordability.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on wet roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is their Bridgestone.
All right. How do we get the prices of cars down? Chris, what you have said all along is there's a whole bunch of different things. You got to look at total cost of ownership and a bunch of things, right?
Well, no, I think that when they do those cost comparisons, they use total cost of ownership so that they have this higher price of the fuel to try and get that cost parity on gas versus electric. But I think if you want to talk about getting the cost of vehicles down, you've got sort of I would say, an arsenal of traditional ways that we've used in the past. There's the part reduction, commonization, volume bundling. This is where you say, hey, I'm going to source these AMG pistons at the same time I'm sourcing my high volume 6-cylinder pistons, and you go to the supplier at the same time and say, I want the best price on both of these, and they have to give you a decent price on those small volume things then. So that's one technique the OEMs have used. I think offshoring, going to companies it used to be Korea, then it was China, now it's ending up being Vietnam and Thailand and others. And it's really, initially people say, oh, it's the cost of labor. And it's not. It's actually the cost of energy is the big thing. Because when you start thinking about, if you're going to make an aluminum oil pan or a valve cover, this takes an immense amount of energy to first of all take the bauxite and make the aluminum, and then take these aluminum ingots and melt them down and put them in a holding furnace. And there's energy all along that chain. And if you've got energy at fractions of a penny a kilowatt hour in China versus commercial electricity in the US might be 5 or 7 cents, depending on, or in some areas of the country it's 30 cents. You can never be competitive.
The pennies add up.
The pennies add up big time, right? So I think that.
So it's not labor, you're saying, it's energy.
It's not just labor.
Labor is a part of it, and it's a big part of it. But it's the whole enterprise has cost reduction through it. But then you do have to put the thing in a box and then somehow get it to where you're building the car.
Right, and then you've got supply chain, long supply chains, but it's shipping is actually pretty cheap compared to the cost.
Well, as long as the shipping routes are wide open.
That's right. Yeah, you don't have issues like this during COVID.
I think that's going to become increasingly an issue. You look at the choke points in the world.
Exactly.
The Houthis firing missiles into the Red Sea. That's going to shut down the Suez Canal, right?
Malacca Strait.
Right. Malacca Strait is another one. You got Russia eyeing the Arctic Ocean, which looks like this century is going to open up. Bering Strait's going to be a real choke point too. So, yeah, I'm not sure the industry is going to be able to count on the shipping routes we've all grown up with.
Right.
There's another aspect of this that's geopolitical, and that's the basic deglobalization that's happening with certain parts of industries that have a direct effect on the auto industry, specifically electronics.
Right. Everybody's building a chip center. Japan, the United States.
Right. And when this is all done, where are the cheapest chips going to come from?
Well, where cheap energy is, to your point.
Or available energy.
Right.
Okay. Because another thing is it takes energy to deglobalize at a national basis. If we want to build more stuff in this country, we have to create more electricity. This is not even talking about electric vehicles, putting it in the equation. We have to. There's no way around it. And that's true for any other country. If you're going to start to ramp up what you build, you have to have the power to build the parts. You also need, and this is where it's going to get really ugly, and I'll get off this quickly, is a population the right age to do it. And that's the one, that's the 12-ton gorilla in the room. Because there are countries in Europe where the median age is so high now, and there is no one to backfill for jobs. There is no one to contribute to the economy for the retirees, or there is, but it's at a reduced rate. This is a giant issue, which is going to put more demand on making affordable vehicles.
I'm glad you brought it back to that, Jim.
That's the point, because the thing is, it's the traditional ways of making cars affordable tend to be rather ugly.
I disagree. I think there's some good ways of doing it. If you sure there's offshoring, there's different things, but if you look at material changes, when I was working on the Pentastar V6, we actually made conscious decisions to use cast iron camshafts. A cast iron camshaft is maybe $10 or $12 each, right? All of the other V6s are using steel or assembled steel camshafts, which are $40 or $50 each. Now, the issue is it's the over-the-nose camshafts, right? There's that lobe. It's how much stress you have there.
Right.
You redesign the valve train to be able to
live with it.
Right.
No, so you still
So
get
the
the
cam
maximum.
lives.
Right, but
you
if-
still
but-
get the maximum lift of the valve for
Yeah.
the performance, but you design the valve train so that you can meet that cam stress. That's good engineering. That's engineering cost out, and you end up saving $150 an engine.
But
Right?
this is
that's a great way of material.
yeah.
But you
And
also
we're
got to have
seeing-
really good process
just
control
remember,
for that.
Well,
type of
but
thing.
we're seeing the same thing in electrification today, right?
Mhm.
So we're seeing electric motors. As we move to 800 volts, you're seeing peak being used on the coating of the wires, and peak is really expensive.
What's peak?
It's a fluoro. I'm not sure it's a fluoropolymer that goes
Okay,
on
some sort of plastic.
It basically it's an insulation so that when you have the stator and all of these wires, it insulates them from each other. Otherwise, you get
it's thermally, it works at high temperatures. It works with weird voltages, but the whole idea is to keep it from cross shorting.
you're basically
windings.
shorting out. So now you've got new materials like PFA, which is another fluorocarbon that you can end up putting on much thinner, which means that you get more copper right in there. So the copper fills higher, resistance goes down, efficiency of the motor goes up. But the PFA is actually, it costs about the same, but because you're using much less of it because it's thinner, because it has better voltage breakthrough. So there's innovation happening everywhere that's going to take money out. I mean, it ends up costing half as much just for that one little bit.
It's dangerous to confuse cost with affordability.
Yeah, exactly.
It is, because-
but one leads to the other.
Not necessarily.
What, you make something cheaper, it's not going to be more affordable?
There's a whole thing about in car companies that do volume. There's a thing about pricing that's determined by perceived value of feature. For example, feature pricing at GM, it would just kill products from a pricing standpoint. Oh, well, that's this, so that's worth this much. So it got rolled in. There was a car that GM did, the GM80s, and they were going to put four-wheel disc brakes on them, and they didn't do it before. There was a huge fight against doing four-wheel discs, not because they didn't want to do them, but because they could come up with a lower-cost disc brake. An engineer could have one. They could invent a lower-cost disc brake, and they were still going to throw $150 on the price of every car that had it. So where is the incentive in that respect if you have this thing where you're pricing for features? That's the part I was saying about the traditional ways of pricing, of being affordable are ugly. It's because there's a tendency to think you have to price for elements on the car. And if affordability is to the customer's face, it's not to the car companies. And while they are related, they are not interdependent, and that's the problem.
But here's why the affordability issue is maybe the interface with the customer, but why the industry needs to get into cost reduction. This is my analysis, right? The car market has stopped growing. You know, we peaked out at about 17 million units. Hopefully, we'll get back to 17 million
We're at
units a year.
16 right now.
Exactly. But I don't think we're ever going to go much above 17 again. Ever, never, ever. Even though the population continues to grow. And when you look at the large volume manufacturers of the world, Toyota, Volkswagen, General Motors, Ford, Honda, blah, blah, they have not grown in a decade. On an inflation-adjusted basis, their revenue is a little bit better than it was. Their volume is not better than it was a decade ago. So you've got markets that are not growing and car companies that are not growing. What are you going to do? I mean, the only thing you can do is raise the prices of your cars or cut the cost to make them, or both, if you're going to protect your margins. So that's why I think this affordability issue is so important, because right now all they're doing is raising their prices.
So I guess I think there's several new things that are coming to market that we haven't seen before. Now, I talked a bit about some of the traditional ones. I think generative AI is going to make a big difference. Generative AI is probably going to make as big a difference in the auto industry as computer-aided design did, right? Going from drafting tables to designing on the tube, and it's probably as big as the internet, as big as those two things combined. Okay. I know suppliers today who are using generative AI to do quotes. So it used to be an OEM puts out a request for quote, and a sales guy will spend 3 days putting together a quote.
A mountain of paperwork.
Sharpen your pencil.
And then he goes to his boss, and there's a bunch of stuff wrong, and he goes back and forth. And 3 weeks later, they come up with this quote. Well, now generative AI, you can point to the last 300 quotes you've done that went out the door, and say, do a quote for company X at this volume for this part, given, and it'll be made in this plant. And generative AI will take everything that's been taken into account in the past and do that quote, and it'll be 99% right in 10 seconds.
Wow.
Right? So think about all the improvements that are going to be made through the supply chain. That's just on. No, there's so many places it's going to be used. 2D,
Look, I
2D
know,
drawings, right?
Right.
I mean, that's just.
I know suppliers at a high level are using generative AI to write code.
Right. Yeah.
There's a danger in that, because once you do that, it's out in the public domain.
No, that's not true.
Is that no?
No. So there's
there's different levels. So
Right.
ChatGPT 4 or whatever, right?
Well, there's actually
there's more
about
than that.
4 levels of AI.
Okay.
So, but the free one that your ChatGPT 3.5 and there's a whole bunch of other ones out there. They're free for a reason, right? It's because they're using your data to improve their models, right? And that has unintended consequences. If you used it to say, hey, look at all of my existing pricing, how should I price this? That existing pricing is then part of the model, right? The ChatGPT 4 and the Copilot that Microsoft runs, and several of the other ones that are out there, they run on your PC. They do not get that information.
Does not go
back.
into
It does not go
into
back.
the public domain.
Right. So
Conversely, it has a more limited basis that it can draw from to do the math, but it's still good. As that's the problem. The open systems have access to so much more data.
well,
Right.
but
if you're writing a quote and basing it on your own data,
Right. You
who
don't
cares?
want. No, I know. You
Right.
don't. Yeah. So the thing is that it's the development of generative AI is going to be really interesting in that it'll be fits and spurts, and then somebody will have some sort of giant jump. They had a better database they were pulling from, and they had basically a streamlined core algorithm they're using.
I think it may also get dumber, which I think is already happening. The ChatGPT 3.5 is actually kind of getting a little dumber over time, and you also have to.
Why
you
is
don't think,
that? Why
you
is
don't think
that?
you don't think they're
Because-
dampening it?
No, I don't. I think
Okay.
there is no control. It just learns. There's nobody that's tweaking something. It's doing it itself.
Why do you think it's getting dumber?
So you've got the information that it's being asked and that it's learning from may not be right. Some of the things that you're pointing it to on the web or that it's pointing to may not be right. The higher level versions of AI, you can point it to your internal information, right? You can point it to
which has good fidelity.
right. You can
it's substantiated.
Right.
You can point it to external databases that you subscribe to. You can point it to things on the web, but it cites what it's actually using, and you can say, yeah, don't use that source, right? Redo it again, but don't use that source. And so the advanced versions are much better than
And you
the
think there's
public
real
ones.
opportunity to take I can't even talk, to take cost out.
I do. I mean, if you look at and the guys who should be scared, I think, are the offshore engineering guys, right? Because we take things like general dimension and tolerance thing of drawings, and you ship that to as a work package to be done by somebody in India or China, and then it comes back and it's done. That can be done by AI in seconds. Or minutes, right? Same with producing 2D drawings of a part so it can go out for quote. We design everything in 3D, but then you still have to do these 2D drawings to go out for quote with it. And sometimes when I was at Chrysler, it would take 2 or 3 weeks to get a 2D drawings.
Yeah.
And this is a high quality designer to do this for a cylinder head or an engine block. That can be done now in seconds or minutes for sure. So I think the efficiencies are going to be there, but some of that offshoring work that's happening, I think that's going to be
A thing of the
challenge.
past, maybe.
You're a
Oh, very
technological
interesting.
optimist, aren't you, Chris?
Well, I'm seeing it happen,
Yeah.
right? I'm seeing this happen in different companies.
Right.
I think there's a lot going on in AI that's going to be.
Well, isn't it the great hope for autonomy as well? to get some of these vehicles that are actually being used out on the street, and maybe use AI to
that's what
to
Tesla's
fine-
using right
fine-tune.
now for
Right.
full self-driving, right? They're
Yep.
feeding it video clips and
Right.
it's learning from
Exactly.
that.
Right.
But getting back to what you were talking about too, the AI system can learn bad driving habits. So you
Right,
got to
so
make sure you
gotta
don't
make sure
teach
you
it that.
only teach the good ones. But you and I talked about the actually last time I was on the show about Comma.ai.
Mhm.
This is an add-on system. So you talk about OEMs charging 10 grand for Super Cruise or Blue Cruise, and this is an add-on system that you basically plug into the camera on your
Wow.
on your vehicle. It has to be equipped with lane keeping
Right.
but that uses AI to drive your vehicle.
So it taps into the basic ADAS system.
It
the
does.
driver
It taps into
assistance
the
system?
ADAS system up by the camera.
Wow.
It's been on sale for a number of years.
Yeah,
now.
it's $1,500.
And how do we? What's the credibility of this system? I mean, have we had crashes? Have we had accidents?
I don't know
Okay.
what the credibility, but there's been I think there's been quite a
been
lot of them
checked out,
sold,
yeah.
and it's for the same system runs on many different vehicles.
You can, Google it right now,
Right.
comma.ai. It'll
Right.
pop up. It'll have a list of the cars that it
Right.
works on. I've looked into this, but I never had a car on the list that met it. So
Oh,
I didn't buy it.
yeah,
But I'd love to find somebody who has. So if anybody out there in the audience knows all about this and you've got experience, let us know.
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that the other new thing that I think that's happening is we're seeing new players, and electrification is really letting new players come into the market. Nidec was a company that grew making the electric motors for disk drives, right? And they're the biggest in the world at doing that. But disk drives are going solid state. People aren't buying PCs anymore. They just have their iPads or phones. So that market's declining. So they're actually moving upstream and selling electric motors for electric vehicles. And they're coming in at the bottom of the market and not quite meeting the specifications that OEMs put out, but they may be good enough. And if you've read any of Clayton Christensen's, the Innovator's Dilemma, right?
That's how it all starts.
That's how it's right. It's always at the bottom of the market, and they're doing exactly that and coming in. So I think, but there's other new players. They're kind of a player that you might expect that would have invade. LG was one that GM kind of dragged in a couple, 10 years ago. But there's new players like Foxconn, right? And Wistron from Taiwan, and Flex Electronics. These are guys that are used to operating at this 1% margin or 2% margin type of, and they're excellent at execution. And they have economies of scale in buying that the auto industry will never have. So when those guys come in and start making your power electronics, that's when you should be scared, and it's not that far away.
So you raise an interesting thing, bringing this back to the whole affordability thing.
Right.
And we talked about this with Jeff Stout from Yanfeng. He believes that this is opening the door. This whole affordability issue is opening the door for, I don't know what you want to call it, micro mobility, neighborhood mobility, a whole new class of vehicles, and more than scooters. So,
but NEVs,
and NEVs,
neighborhood
electronic
Well,
vehicles.
yeah,
They're
be
sort
careful
of now.
because the Chinese have NEVs too, right?
That's right. No,
Yeah, but if you go to upscale communities, or if you go to retirement communities and what's the hottest thing?
It's the golf
Electric
cart.
golf cars.
Yeah.
The hottest thing. I was down in Florida a year ago, and we were in just south of Miami. Anyway, very upscale thing. All the teenagers were driving these electric golf cars with cool wheels. That's the thing. You have to put cool wheels on them and customize them. But is this going to be?
I mean, are these things out in traffic with those
Yes.
F-150s we were talking about earlier?
Yeah. But they're not legal on roads with speed limits, I think, above 25 miles an hour. Maybe it's 30 miles
There's
an hour.
35, I think. but
So
yeah.
you got big
Right.
honking vehicles
It's a
around
restriction.
you, but it's suburban kind of neighborhood suburban
Right.
speeds that
Low
they're
speed
driving
cruising
at.
kind of thing. Yeah.
But I'm wondering, is this going to fill the gap in affordability?
So I think what happens here is I call it the Wuling method
Mhm.
of cost reduction, right? Wuling I mean, the little Honghua electric mini EV, right?
$4,500.
Right, exactly. So how do they get there? They do not do what Tesla's doing, right? Tesla makes these giga castings and bespoke systems that require a 11,000 ton high pressure die cast
16,000 ton.
16,000. So they don't do that, right? What they're doing is that they basically source all of the parts individually, and they have 3, 5, or even 7 different suppliers for each component, and they only give the components, source the components to the bottom 3 in price, right? And you want to talk about driving price out on the supply chain, and all of the suppliers cut their, they're cutting their margins, but they're also cutting their all of the fat in the system. And that's how they get down to those things.
Now, my only question is that sustainable? Because I've only seen a little bit of Wuling's financials once, 2 years ago. And by my calculation, revenue divided, or profits divided by vehicles, they're making $20 a car profit.
Yeah, so I actually saw something published that said it was 14 on the EVs.
Yeah.
But that was allowing them to do kind of like the old, like we were talking about Cafe before. They were then selling a bunch of their minivans and other vehicles because they had to meet the China average fleet.
Okay.
And so they were making all these little EVs so that they could keep selling minivans at a big profit. So, but yeah, maybe it wasn't that profitable after all. But
well, look, there's something. If you're a challenger and you want to break into the market, hey, you shouldn't expect to be wealthy and rich right off the bat.
That's what
you got to
venture
earn your
capitalists
way,
are for, right?
And they're earning the way. I mean, I think the Mini EV is the second best-selling EV in China, second only to the Model Y.
Right.
It's actually outsold at some time in some months.
Yeah. Well,
now BYD is
right. Yeah,
BYD
it's a
coming
different
in like a
market now.
monster.
The definition of tofu drag.
We didn't talk much about the Model 2. I mean, speaking of Tesla and affordability, I mean, that's supposed to be the next cool, interesting threat, right? Built in Mexico, shipped to the United States, $25,000.
Yeah, but
smaller.
But the thing is, the one aspect that we know about it that has got me enthralled is this new assembly process. What they're calling unboxed assembly. This gets back to what you were saying earlier, Chris. This stuff starts generating all kinds of new technology, new ideas, new ways of doing things. I love what Tesla's doing. I don't know if it's going to work, but I love that somebody is trying to take the moving assembly line, which we know is inherently inefficient, and try to figure out a way to make it a whole lot more efficient. Not the Toyota way of Kaizen improvements, little steps at a time, but blowing the whole thing up and redoing it in a new way.
Yeah.
Well, they're saying this Model 2 is so small that they're going to do an entire floorboard, like a skateboard, in one casting, and then that's when they'll be at 16,000 tons to create the skateboard.
But I think let's step back and look at history as well. The Model 3 was announced that it was going to be a $35,000 car.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right, and it sat at an average transaction price of 55, 56,000 for years, and now it's down into I think sub 50, but not that much below 50, right?
Right.
So to say it's a $25,000 car, maybe
30.
Maybe there'll be one specification of that could be that. But
no, it's going to have to be. Look,
they're really good. They're really good at promising pricing. They don't deliver.
Yeah,
plain and simply, they just
things
are.
have changed. Look, there's a raging price war going on in China right now.
Is.
If this thing comes off way above $25,000, Tesla's dead with the Model 2. It knows it's got to be able to compete with BYD. I've driven the BYD Seagull. It was $11,500. It's a pretty good little car. And guess what? They just chopped the price again in China.
But John, that's not a compliant vehicle. The Seagull is not a compliant vehicle in the United States. And again, getting back to my concern about safety, it's an awfully small, light vehicle to be running around with F-150s and big SUVs.
It was not designed to meet U.S. crash standards, but I'll bet
it meets China crash standards, which is almost as tough as U.S. In fact, I'm not sure there's that much different anymore. If you pass the China crash standards, I would bet.
Oh, you still have a problem with offset. There's a problem with offset from
I
the
think
Chinese standards. It's not in harmony yet.
Doesn't matter. You know, they'll get there. And even if it's not going to be $11,500 in the United
won't.
States, it's
It
going to
won't
be
be.
well under 20 grand.
That's reasonable.
Well under 20 grand.
And
So-
that's more like what people are talking about when they're talking about an affordable
Exactly
car.
right.
But I'll tell you, I was in China last year, and I went car shopping one day, and I went through all of the different OEMs, and I think Xiaopeng was one that I look at their P7 vehicle. It's the size of a Model S. It's roughly
Model S?
Model
Yeah.
S, right?
Yeah,
it's $27,000,
Oh, wow.
right? I mean, how even if you slap a 35% or 26.5%
27 and a half.
import tax, it still ends up being $35,000,
What
right?
kind of performance does this thing have?
It was a 70 kilowatt hour battery with 260 horsepower or something. So it wasn't. It's
Right.
not.
It's not a
not a
Model.
Model
It's not a
S.
Model S.
Thank you.
It's the size of Model S, but it's not a Model S.
But
They're
it's-
not
but
saying
it
it
looks
is.
like a Model
But
S.
there's 260,
Right.
70 horsepower. I mean, that's more than enough.
Yes,
I mean,
it
how,
is.
how many IC engines are out there with that?
Right.
Right.
I suspect it's heavier than the average car that have a 270 horsepower engine.
Well, with the
Especially-
battery and
Yeah, and if it's a Model S size car, and yeah,
It probably is, but
But at that price, there's going to be plenty of
of
people
course.
wanting to buy.
But
it.
I
but-
bet you that outperform a Toyota Camry. How's that? Or some other.
Be careful, which
or-
Camry?
Well,
I mean,
the,
V6 Camry is actually you get out of one, you're like, what? Why wasn't it like this 20 years ago instead of now?
yeah, I think you have to be a little cautious looking at vehicles that are in other markets passing their safety standards, not necessarily European crash standards, but Chinese crash standards or Southeast Asia crash standards,
Southeast Asia is different.
or Latin
Yeah.
American crash standards versus the United States. Because I mean, Jim was mentioning, offset. I mean, that's an extremely difficult test to pass.
Well,
It requires a lot of work.
Remember,
to get there.
if you want to sell cars in the States, there are 2 offset tests you have to pass.
Driver and passenger.
No, the FMVSS one and
IIHS.
damn right.
Right.
The Chinese thought they were going to be rolling into the European market hard, and so China Brilliance did, who was the partner of BMW in China, brought a car in. They started selling it, and ADAC, the German Auto Club, decided to crash test one.
Didn't do well.
And they stopped selling them.
Very quickly. My favorite was when the spot welds on the A-pillar that held the A-pillar inner flange and outer flange unzipped back to about 2/3 of the way behind the B-pillar. And ADAC's like, they didn't expect it to be what it was. They thought it may not be in. They're like, well, and
Yeah, what do insurance companies think of that?
the ADAC test, though, is much more robust than the TÜV test. That's my point. So you have things, there's perception and there's reality. There's not harmonization yet in offset crash with the US. We're still an outlier in a way. It's close. It's getting close, but it's not there. Also, the side impact test, Europe and the US are different. The procedure is different, but it's enough so you can pass one and not pass the other. The cars are equally safe. They are.
Yeah.
That's just
They should be harmonized, probably.
They should. They should.
Absolutely.
The truth is they should, but they're not, and that's a whole other story.
Yeah, that's a whole nother show. It really is. That's a good one,
Think
too.
about this: harmonization across the EU, China, Japan, United States,
South
would,
Korea.
so that would reduce some vehicle costs.
Oh, yeah. Great point.
That
Jeff.
alone,
Yeah,
that alone.
Right.
Right.
Well, what's crazy is it takes 7 years for NHTSA to write a new safety regulation. It's beyond stupid.
To get it implemented. You mean, not to write it.
Well, no, to get it implemented.
implement
From
the-
the time they say, okay,
They
we'll
put it-
start taking,
They put it-
input.
They open up the docket. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, 7 years.
7 years. So this is nuts. And my pet peeve right now is they've got these great headlamps in Europe. with
We
that
don't get 'em.
LED,
The laser lights, yeah.
the laser lights.
Oh my gosh.
They would not blind oncoming drivers. They improve safety. And it's legal in Europe. It's not legal here.
Right.
Why?
Why do-
Why?
What do they
A lot-
cost?
a
What do
lot
they
of-
cost?
well,
Speaking
a lot of
affordability.
European-
I don't
Well,
know.
yeah.
Laser lights?
Guys, a lot of
I'll tell you what,
European
I would
cars.
pay for it. When I
You
drove,
would.
Well, no, when I drove a vehicle in Europe with it, it basically puts a black spot around the oncoming car, and everything else is lit up like daylight.
Oh.
And so those pedestrians that are on the side of the road,
You see them.
You see them.
But you have to understand, a
It's-
lot of European cars that are sold in this country have those lights right now.
no, they don't.
Yes, they do. They're not enabled. It's software.
Yeah.
In fact,
Maybe-
I had a
right.
car that had them,
Yeah.
and you know what? Had the software activated. You can actually do it. There are ways to do it.
All
and
right.
we were up in Traverse City, and it's
Careful, Jim.
but it's amazing because
Trouble.
it's like we're on a back road going to
Yeah.
Maple City from Traverse City on a road in the middle of the night, and it's like these are the best headlights I have ever experienced in my life.
Right.
Yeah.
And once you've had them, you're willing to pay for them.
Exactly. I would pay for it. Yeah.
It's like a heated steering wheel. I'll never buy a car without it, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Why did it take us, a century to figure out to heat the seats?
Yeah.
I mean, jeez. So yeah, this comes back to affordability. So there's got to be, look, people want their luxuries. They want their, nice things. They're going to pay for it. But I still come back to the imperative for the industry is in the mature markets, they're no longer growing. The markets are not growing, and the companies in those markets are not growing. They make it look like they're growing, but take a look over the last decade, and you'll see all the lines have flatlined. The revenue growth, the profitability, it's all flatlined.
So with software-defined vehicles, where you can turn on features, there was
Customers love that.
Well, the recent misstep, I think, with BMW and the heated seats.
Yes.
I forget how much it was a month to have a heated seat, but
It
it was expensive.
It was
And
expensive.
people were like, "What?
Right.
I've got to pay for this?"
No, look, it's got to be compelling. And so,
But you could shut all that stuff off and go get to your affordability.
Well,
Yes,
except
you
you're
can.
not changing the cost on the vehicle. Therein
Right.
lies the issue.
Right, that's true.
So with
But you're
John's
charging everybody else to have heated seats.
that's how you grow your top line. That's how you
It's
get
like
around this market that's not growing. Is you offer things where people go, yeah, that's compelling. I want to buy it. And GM and Ford are doing a good job with Super Cruise and Blue Cruise. People are paying for that. They want to drive with their hands not on the wheel.
Right.
They are, but as we said, you'll have competitors come into the market that will, and it's not, and especially, if you look historically, the OEMs have always made money off. First, it was nav systems, and then backup cameras, and all of these things that cost dollars to put in, but it really didn't. They're charging $200 for the system. The screen's already there. Backup camera's easy. Why did it take so long? But once it was mandated by regulation that every car has to have a backup camera, then that's the price of entry. Every car has it. They can no longer charge that premium. Now you get this the pressure on those components to really take cost out, because now it's so sometimes regulation.
It's a commodity.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Regulation can actually drive the price down. Tire pressure monitoring systems were the same way, right? You had to pay extra for them. Once they were mandated, price plummets of those systems and is part of the base price of the vehicle.
That's right. Hey, look, we've used up our allotted time here. Great discussion. I'm not sure we solved things, but we raised a lot of good issues here, So anyway, I want to thank you all. Chris Thomas, Jim Hall, Jack Keebler. Thanks, you guys. This has been a really good discussion. I want to thank all of you for having tuned in.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.